about my trip to New York with the International Relations course, and I won't really talk much about the specific course, but you can ask me questions in the end. It's a course I really recommend you guys to take, though. But we'll get to that later. This is about my trip to New York with the course, in which we participated in the NHSMUN. It's a UN role play for high school students, and it stands for High School Model United Nations. So that's what it's short for, NHSMUN. And it's the world's largest role play for this, and I think it's about 5,000 to 6,000 people in total that is occupied with this event each year, and it's often in the beginning of March each year, and it ends in the General Assembly. So you have these committee sessions in like conference halls, and that's at the Hilton Hotel. But in the end, you have the final conference in the UN General Assembly, and this is the place where all the presidents and all other leaders stand and negotiate and stuff. So it's a really cool thing to do. But this presentation will mainly be about my experiences with the people that I've encountered, both during the NHSMUN and overall in New York. And it might be quite incomprehensive for you guys, because I will talk a little bit about the Hofstede theories, and I'm quite sure you haven't gone through it yet. It's if you've had leadership or English C. So I will apply his Hofstede. He made like it's a quite a bit of a theory, but he created this masculinity index, for example. That's one of them, where he rated the countries depending on masculinity, and then he had something called power distance, for example. Power distance is the distance between power of the two people. For example, you have the president, or we have the individual human. How much difference in power there is between people in a country. And this index shows, from the index you can pretty much, he applied the index to different countries. For example, Sweden has a low masculinity index, and it means that we're feminine in our way of being, and feminine in this way isn't about being a female, it's about more about equality between the two genders. But I'm not going to talk about that. So my experiences with the American people is that they are very social, and they have a high masculinity. It's from the Hofstede theories. And high masculinity in this case means that they are like ego-orientated, and that they really do strive for something high, and there's like no other way. They strive for something high, and failure is not really an option. Failure means disaster. And during this event, during the NHSMUN, I was in a large committee, because you're divided in a committee, and you represent a country. The first year I went, I represented Norway. The second year I went also with the International Relations course. We represented India. And then you're divided into committees. My committee was constituted of about 300 people. And this means that it's all-out warfare when it comes to speaking, to getting your word out. You have this board of people, of about 3 people, and they are the ones handing the word out if you want to debate about something, or you get your propositions forward, and you have to raise this placard to show that you're interested. Then they put you on a speakers list, and but with 300 people you will have about perhaps 40 people that wants to speak, but only 5 of them will actually be able to speak. So it's really all-out warfare when it comes to making yourself seen. It's like everyone waves the placard so they can get the attention of the board. Another process during this event is resolution writing, because it's a UN role play, so you have to write resolutions in order to mold the UN. During this process, many countries, because you represent a country, many countries will try to find allies. In this case, it's not like military allies, but it's more allies that have the same political thinking when it comes to the debated topics. And with 300 people, in this case, you also end up with a lot of different groups. You might have about 20 different groups that are each running their own resolution. And in the end, you only have 2 resolutions that will be passed on to the General Assembly process, in which you vote for all resolutions. So 15 resolutions have to come down to 2 in the end. And when you write a resolution, you can either be a signatory or sponsor. Sponsors means that you have actually done something with the resolution. It means that you have added a piece of text. A signatory, means that you want to see the resolution being debated on, whether you like it or not. It's just a point of interest, so to speak. But when it comes to sponsors, you of course always have these students that are more forward than others and that are contributing more than others. So you always have like one student who is the main author of these resolutions. And that's where I've seen this masculinity from Hofstede. The ego-oriented and failing is a disaster. Because a very common thing when you're a sponsor of a resolution is that the main author steals your sentences or something. And because of course, when you have sponsors on a list, you of course want to be the first name on that list, because you might have 15 sponsors, and it's obvious you want your country to be the first name on the list. And often it's like the main author who's one of those countries, and it's quite often that author just steals the sentences from the other countries, and then they just erases the other countries from the sponsor list. So when in the resolution process, you really have to watch your back all the time, because people will backstab you, pretty much. So that's one of the things with the ego-oriented with Americans. And that failing is a disaster. They really go all out, and they get really disappointed when their resolutions don't get passed, or when if they say something and they don't get the support for it. It's not a disaster, but it's still a failure which you notice. And my experiences outside of the NHS, and now I'm thinking about people in the streets. It's that in New York you see a lot of homeless people, and sadly it's most often they're constituted by either black people or old Vietnamese, what do you say, the Americans who have been fighting the Vietnam War, and they go back and they have no social security. You'll find a lot of them. And then also that many of the jobs are really low status. If you have a low status job in Sweden, as we say low status, that job might be like really, really low status in New York. For example, I've discussed a lot with taxi drivers, and in New York they often have 3 different jobs, taxi driver being one of them. I talked to one guy, a Pakistani guy, who goes up 4 in the morning, drives his cab for like 5 hours, then he goes to his next job for 5 hours, then he goes to his third job for 5 hours in the afternoon to evening, because if you drive a cab in New York, you don't really earn much money. You only earn money on the tip, basically. So that's one thing. And I've also found that while discussing with people that we have some kind of social security net in Sweden, which if you fall through, it's fairly easy to get up again, and it's a fairly stable security net. But in the United States, they also have a security net, of course, but if you fall through it, you really do fall through it. That's one thing. And that's when I come to the other Hofstede dimension, which is called power distance, the power between two individuals. And actually, the United States scores quite low on power distance, which means that there is not much difference between power between a normal human and like the higher power positions. But if you look at an individual level, if you go down to these people like taxi drivers or homeless people, and then compare to the President of the United States, it's a huge power distance. And this shows that like the theories of Hofstede can't really be applied on an individual level, but more like on an average level or the overall level of a country and its population. And I guess that's the conclusion. The conclusion is that I've met a lot of people that are nice. My first experience of the American people, especially in the NHSMN, is that they are very social. They're very friendly. As soon as you enter the conference hall, you would have like 10 people approaching you to say hi and present themselves. But when it really gets down to business, they are quite ego-orientated and they do things for their own good. Well, I guess we Swedes are more like democratic in our way of being and working with each other, because I guess that's to go back to elementary school. You always have these group tasks, and it's always like that everyone should do the same amount of work, and that we should be very democratic when it comes to working. But there, it's really, even though you're supposed to work in a group and that you need to work with others, they are still very ego-oriented. At least that's my experience of them. And yeah, that's pretty much the end of the presentation.